calorie counting just doesn't work. We've been brainwashed for the last 40 years into thinking that calories were the thing. When you look at the actual data of all the studies done, 80 or 90% have returned to their baseline weight, and then they tend to overshoot.
Dr. Tim Spector is the founder of the UK's largest twin study and the co-founder of Zoe, a personalized nutrition company. This episode deep dives on how gut microbiome determines our individual response to food and why shifting focus from calorie counting to food quality is the real key to long-term health.
70 to 80% of people believe that if they see high protein in a product, it's healthy. Only 10% of people need more protein, whereas 95% of people need more fiber.
If something is labeled organic, is that something that we should take seriously, or is that just hype?
The certification of organic in the US is pretty poor, and you might end up paying twice as much for something that says organic. There are lots of exceptions, but food companies deliberately make food softer and faster to eat. They want you to absorb it without noticing in front of the TV. We all know that feeling where it's a big bag of Doritos or Pringles or whatever it is. They've got exactly that formula.
For reading the back of a package and looking at the ingredient list, like what are some red flags to show, okay, this is ultra processed?
If you had to look at one thing on there, even if it says low fat on the front, that's a pretty good red flag, because
Tim, welcome to Young and Profiting Podcast.
Great to be here.
I am very excited for this interview. I can't wait to learn all about gut health and the types of foods we should be eating. And when I was studying you, one of the things that I found really interesting is that you've done an extensive amount of studies on twins. You actually started something called Twins UK. And based on that, you realized that genetics aren't the major factor when it comes to what we eat and how it impacts us, and that different foods can actually impact people with the same genetics differently, which I just thought was so mind-blowing. Can you explain to us some of the studies and research that you've uncovered via twins that helped you understand how food really impacts our bodies?
It's taken me 30 years to get to this point, so it wasn't overnight. And I was very keen geneticist, thinking that everything was genetic. And so a big proponent of that. And it took really one experiment to change my mind, which was looking at identical twins who were raised together and really lived together until they were in their 20s, and looking at their gut microbes and seeing that when you looked in detail and you sequenced their gut microbes, the species they had were really very different. They only shared a small fraction of all those species and even less of the subspecies. And that was the first time in about 20 odd years that I'd seen anything really different in identical twins. Generally, they matched because they either had the same environment or they had the same genes. There wasn't this rather randomness of finding these microbes. So for me, that was a big turning point in my career as a researcher, and got me moving away from genetics, which I thought was the magic bullet for everything, into this new field. This is about 15 years ago, of the microbiome and gut health, because for me, it was perhaps this missing link between, what we've misunderstood about food, thinking that everyone who eats the same food reacts the same way. And suddenly you realize, well, if identical twins have different microbes, then they, in a way, react with food differently. That could explain why they die of different conditions, why one gets ill, the other one doesn't, et cetera, et cetera. So that really fascinated me, as this extra bit of individuality we've all got that you can see clearly in these identical twins that's quite difficult to see in the general population.
I don't think our listeners truly understand what microbiome means. Like, this is a really trendy word that we're hearing. I just had Naveen Jain on the show, and he was talking about gut health and microbiome. And I'm curious to understand, like, what is the job of the microbiome? Like, what does it actually do? I know it transforms simple food into more complex food, and I don't think people quite understand, like, what is the job of a microbiome?
But we use them as chemical factories. They're like a whole grouping of communities of mini pharmacies that are converting the components of the food we eat into amazingly helpful chemicals for our body. And so I think that's the best way of thinking of them, as this really big, rich, diverse community of, maybe everyone has maybe 1,000 different species and subspecies inside them, all of which are producing different chemicals. And they do that depending on if you feed them right, you get the biggest diversity of chemicals. And those chemicals go on and help us in three key ways. They help our metabolism to stop us maybe overeating and putting on too much fat and sorting out our heat and the general mechanics. They also are important for our nervous system. So things travel up from our gut to our brain, and they will determine things like our mood and influence whether inflammation in your gut is going to cause depression, things like this. And they're also really important for our immune system. And we're realizing more and more how important the immune system is for every aspect of our health, because it stops us aging, it stops us getting cancer, it stops us getting allergies, you name it, the immune system now is involved. So that's what they're there for. As far as we're concerned, they're just trying to survive. But we give them a nice home in our gut and a place to live. We feed them every day. And in return, with evolution has worked out that they provide us with a lot of these chemicals. Some of them are things like vitamins and all the B vitamins, for example, they produce, as well as lots of gut hormones for breaking down food. So it's a really close relationship we've got with them that we've evolved over millions of years really to have.
Can you give us a concrete example, like what happens when we eat like a piece of fruit versus when we eat something ultra processed in terms of how our microbiome utilizes that food?
Yeah, a piece of fruit that won't be absorbed in the upper part of the gut. It goes right down to the lower part, the lower intestine, so it takes longer to get there. And the skin particularly will have lots of fiber in it and also have these polyphenols, which are the defense chemicals you find in natural fruits that protect the plant, but also our microbes extract from that fruit. So they're extracting the fibers, they break it down in our lower gut. They use the fibers for energy and to produce other chemicals. They're like the building blocks of these chemicals we're talking about. And the polyphenols, these defense chemicals that give the color to the fruit or the bitterness, say in olive oil, they're used by the microbes as fuel. So they're extra source of fuel, again, to make them grow better and produce more goodness. Now, that's what should happen, and that's what happened to our ancestors. When we have ultra-processed food, UPFs, what happens is that most of that, it's eaten very fast. It gets mostly absorbed in the upper part of our intestine. So our microbes generally don't get to see it. And it has very little fiber in it. So they're basically being starved of food. And the sugars and the fats are getting absorbed quite quickly with any modest interaction with our gut microbes. There's also none of these natural defense chemicals, these polyphenols. And then you've got these unnatural chemicals like artificial sweeteners, emulsifiers, preservatives, etc., which some of them are absorbed, but others do go into the gut where they can cause problems for our gut microbes, make them stick together, make them produce chemicals that might lead to diabetes and have various different effects that we hadn't really thought about 10 years ago.
It sounds like we really should not be eating a lot of ultra-processed foods. And I definitely want to talk about how we can tell the difference between a processed food that might be okay for us versus an ultra-processed food. But first, I want to understand, like, how do we have a healthy microbiome? Like, what are your tips in order for us to have diversity, and what should we be eating to have a healthy microbiome?
Well, we get our first microbiome from our mothers, so we need to thank our mothers for that. And birthing is a messy business, and that's designed that way. So a bit of your mother's microbiome gets into all our mouths during birth. And then over the next 4 years, we slowly build up this microbiome through breast milk, and that allows us to digest breast milk. And then increasingly through the diversity of foods, which start to then feed different microbes that we're experiencing in our surroundings. When we're picking up, you get lots of microbes just on food itself. You get it from surfaces, you get it from soil, from trees, you get it from the rest of your family, you get it from your playmates in nursery school. So there's microbes all over the place, and eventually they settle down, and the way to then nourish them is essentially to work out what they want to eat. We've come up with a few basic principles of what microbes really want. And we did this in conjunction with the company I co-founded, Zoe. And these principles, which we're trying to sort of educate everyone with, are that microbes like to eat diversity of plants. So eating the same kale salad every day isn't going to work because each plant has different fibers, and therefore it has a very different chemical composition, and our microbes are fussy. And that's why we've come up with eating 30 different plants a week as a goal to try to hit that target and exceed it. And if you do that, that's the best way to get a diverse growth of all these microbes, because the more you have, the healthier you'll be. Second would be to eat the rainbow so that you're getting these defense chemicals, these polyphenols. So you pick brightly colored plants, also bitter ones. So things like dark chocolate, olive oil, coffee, even red wine have some benefits because of the polyphenols. Then you've got eating fermented foods. So studies have shown that if you have at least 3 portions of fermented food, you can really, really enhance your immune system and get your gut going in ways that are different to the diversity. So in a way, that's a complementary system. And fermented foods contain live microbes in food. So they're like probiotic tablets, but actually living, and they're in food, and they're much more diverse. And then you've got other little tricks, such as trying to eat more legumes as a source of protein rather than just raw, big chunks of meat. Giving your gut a rest so time-restricted eating. We know that your gut microbiome and the gut lining improve when you have at least 12 hours overnight when you're not eating. So cutting out late night snacking. Then you've got a crucial one is to cut out ultra-processed foods as much as possible. We can talk about which ones, because they're not all the same. They're not all bad. And then finally, I think the key is to think of food in terms of quality, not calories. Because the food companies want us to think about food solely in terms of macronutrients and calories. And that helps them, but it doesn't help your gut microbes. They want quality, they want real food, and we should be thinking about the quality of the food we're eating and ignore calories, because calorie counting just doesn't work. Nobody in my field in nutrition now believes in them.
Yeah, this gives us so much to kind of dig on. So first, with the 30 different plants in a week, that can sound really overwhelming, but that also includes things like spices, correct?
A teaspoon of spices counts as a plant. You're talking about every different type of nut and seed. And there's many of those. You can put them in a jar, which I do every morning. So herbs, spices, nuts, seeds, even different colored vegetables. You can get carrots. You can get like Persian carrots, which are purple, different to orange ones. They have different chemical compositions. So as far as the microbes are concerned, it's a different treat for them. And yeah, it's really important.
I think this goes against like what is viral on social media, because everything is about meal prepping and making one meal and then eating it all week. Like that is like a big thing that a lot of health conscious people do. They're trying to eat healthy, so they're meal prepping the same meal, then eating it every day. So to your point, if you're eating like different nuts or like other ways to kind of get different food into your system, if you're meal prepping, like that's ideal.
Yeah, I mean, nothing wrong with meal prepping if it's a healthy meal and you wouldn't otherwise be having healthy food. But I think finding ways to enhance the plant count and vary it a little bit is really important. So, this whole concept is really important because people have got used, they get into a rut. You go and you say, what's my average lunch? And you always have the same salad in the same place. And it seems healthy, but for your gut microbes, they get bored, and only those guys will survive. We know from some of our studies that there's a microbe inside you that only eats coffee. And so if you never drink coffee, this guy is never going to grow. And so there might well be one for avocados or blueberries or baobab, and so being more adventurous is part of this. And the fact that some people find it hard, they say, oh, it's too hard, I can't do that. So we did actually come up at Zoe with a solution, a prebiotic mix of 34 plants, most of them freeze-dried, that people could add to their food. So if they were meal prepping, you just add these 30-odd extra, dried plants, and that gives you the diversity. And we did a study on it. It's called Daily 30, and it actually had more effect on your gut microbes than, say, a standard probiotic. I think it's a different mindset of what you need to do to eat well. It's to really be adventurous in what you're adding, and just think, what haven't I had this week?
And I know we want to discuss the difference between ultra-processed food and just processed food, because a lot of guidance out there is like, don't eat anything in a box, don't eat anything in a can. But that's not necessarily true, and that's also not practical for a lot of people.
Cans are generally pretty healthy. So I eat lots of stuff out of cans, and often they're minimally processed and very nutritious. So you buy a can of beans, and if there's not too much of a sweet sauce on it or no sauce, it is ideal. And you can get 20 different types of bean just about in the United States. Very cheap, very nutritious, good source of protein, but also, importantly, lots of different interesting fibers. And then you've got, you can buy cans of tomatoes. They're actually better in a can often than buying them from a store. They've done tests on it, and some of their nutrients like lycopene, which is preventive of some cancers like prostate cancer. There's more of it in the can variety than not.
Interesting.
So cans are great. The frozen aisle is also really good, interestingly. So if you buy the pure stuff, I'm not talking about the ready meals, but if you're buying just some chopped vegetables, beans, peas, or frozen berries, actually they're often at least as nutritious as the fresh ones. So, and that's something you can always keep in your freezer and pull out when you need it. It doesn't have to be seasonal, and they're very cheap. So I think the idea that cheap means processed isn't always correct, and I think that's a big misconception.
And I also think people get confused, like yogurt is technically processed, right? Sourdough is technically processed. So these are actually pretty healthy foods if you're getting, if it has like pure ingredients and doesn't have like any funny ingredients in it. Those are technically processed foods, but still very good for you, right?
Virtually everything is processed to some degree. As you said, yogurt, cheese, all the dairy products. And we know that, things like yogurt have been shown to be healthy for us. So I think we need to stop worrying about that and start thinking more sensibly. Has that processing led to something unhealthy about it? And the current definitions of UPF are really far too broad, because the current definition is not a health score, it's a processing score. So it's saying how much, according to these Brazilian researchers, this food has been processed in very broad categories. There are only like 4 categories of them, and something can have very minimal amounts of processing that aren't harmful for your health, and yet it's included in the top category. So I think they were fine for research at population level, the sort of stuff I do, epidemiology, but not for an individual. And that's why we've come up with a new way of scoring this, that instead of 60% of all your food being UPF that you have to avoid, we've cut it down to about 25% of the real ones. And it's not just processing score, it's actually accounting for all the things in ultra-processed food that are bad for you, which is quite interesting, really, because up until recently, we had no clue what they were. We thought it was just the additives, and people focused on these red dyes or something else. But that's just one part of the story. So we took really separate categories. So what we did at Zoe was we looked at those additives, but we only included additives we were worried about that had been associated with some health problem, because some additives are like vitamin C, right? So you're not going to say, I'm not going to eat that because it's got vitamin C in it, or iron or something else like that. So that was one category. The second was something called hyperpalatability, whether has it been designed by the food companies to make you keep eating it and never get full, right? This is this so-called bliss point in the brain that the scientists in these companies are really brilliant at. And, we all know that feeling where it's a big bag of Doritos or Pringles or whatever it is. They've got exactly that formula that is that combination of the sugar, the salt, the fat that just makes you keep eating and overrides those signals. So you just stuff your face. You're not really getting the normal signals that you should be. So hyperpalatability is the second thing that we measure. And about 70% of these foods have that particular quality. And it's good to have that warning about it. Then you've got things like the texture of the food. So we know that food companies deliberately make food softer and faster to eat. And so there's been some recent studies giving people two identical diets, and one was textured really softly, the other one, the original texture. So one was processed, same basic ingredients, calories, etc. And those people ate about nearly 400 calories more a day just because the food was softer. And we know now that generally when you're having these particular high-risk foods, you will overeat by about 500 calories a day, which is over 20% of your intake without knowing it. And you could have the identical food made from scratch, the identical food made there. But now we're starting to understand the mechanisms, and so this is why we've come up with an app that gives you this new ultra-processed risk score, so you can scan stuff in a store and work it out, because it's not easy in your head to work out all these different combinations. And this is what the manufacturers really rely on, that it's so hard to tell because they've all got health claims on the front and they all look fantastic, and lots of healthy farmers and happy people and pictures of vitamins dancing around. So it's understanding the basic science of what they're trying to do allows us to then combat it and realize, okay, this is the antidote. These are the ones you have to avoid.
That's really fascinating. So is the app, is it like the Zoe app, and is it available in the US as well?
Yes. And it's currently free to download. So it's, if anyone's listening, it's a fantastic way, an aid to understanding this whole thing. And you just uses AI. You snap a food, or you go into a store and snap the barcode, and you can learn a lot from it. Download it while it's still free.
So what is some quick ways, like for reading the back of a package and looking at the ingredient list, like what are some red flags to show, okay, this is ultra processed? And then secondly, like what are some examples of some foods that they're making softer that we should be aware of?
Assume you don't have the app, you're in a hurry, you're looking at the back. Generally, as a broad rule, the number of ingredients, things you don't understand, if there's several that, you can't, you don't know what that means, that's a sign that there's lots of processing in there. If you've got lots of emulsifiers in there, which are these things, these glues that stick the food together, that's generally a red flag. And of course, the more they've tried to color it or add taste flavors to it, it's a sign that more they've distorted the actual original structure of that food and are making it in the way that you shouldn't. It also generally they're low in fiber, so trying to look at the fiber count. If you had to look at one thing on there, generally, and it might say low fat on the front, and that's a pretty good red flag, because it's cheaper for them to add in other texture products like starches that are slightly sweet and remove the fat, which saves them money. And so you end up having more sugar and less fat and helping their profits. So, generally look at the back, total number of ingredients. I don't understand any of these. The worst offenders are really obvious. There are some subtle ones that are quite hard. The texture of the food is really important. Food companies don't want you to chew. They want you to just sort of absorb it without noticing in front of the TV.
Mm-hmm.
Then they're doing their job. So I think they've really changed most meals. So most ready meals you buy that you just stick in the microwave, they're extremely soft. You never get, if you never know, your pasta's never al dente when you've got it in a microwave meal. In the same way that it might take you time to chew. There's hardly any examples of a really tough product that takes time to chew, and that I think is really important because it doesn't contain the whole foods. They're too expensive, or they don't store very well, so you won't get the whole grains, the nuts. You're getting the soft inner parts of the product rather than the whole thing, and that's really the giveaway across the whole area. Everything is softer, everything is easier to eat. Nothing really requires much in the way of chewing.
So when I'm online and I'm following all these fitness influencers and nutritionists that are influencers, a lot of them are telling you to track your calories, track your macros, and they're really obsessed with that. I know that you have an opposing view that like calories are probably unnecessary to track, and we really need to think about the quality of our foods. Can you help us understand like what we actually need to be looking for and why calories is not the right way to look at things?
Yeah, well, we've been brainwashed for the last 40 years into thinking that calories were the thing to eat. And this was really led by the food companies, but also the diet industry, the classic Weight Watchers and all the others that came off of that, because it's a really easy thing, to give people goals and say, right, success or failure, you've failed, it's your fault, it's not our fault. Therefore, they keep coming back and paying them more money. But, I'm a scientist foremost. And when you look at the actual data of all the studies done, even in trials where people are given an amazing amount of support to do calorie-restricted diets, the most they can go is about 2 years. And the vast majority, 80 or 90%, have returned to their baseline weight by that time, and then they tend to overshoot. So they often do worse having gone through this. So everyone, most of these people are getting paid to get people into these programs. There's plenty of them, short-term programs, easy to track your food. AI now does it for you. But, it works for 6 weeks, you lose some weight, but then you get incredibly hungry. Your body senses you're not getting enough energy. Your fullness signals you're not being filled up, and you will revert. And those hunger signals just get dialed up and it becomes unbearable. All you're thinking about is food, and that's how we've evolved as humans. So that's why this isn't true. And as I was saying, these experiments which we did with ultra-processed food, we're using identical meals in terms of calories. So if you think about it, if you're only talking about calories, you could be out by 500 calories a day because you're eating the junk food with low calorie rather than the real low calorie made from scratch. And you'll be having 20% more food in that day just because you're picking the junk and you can be counting your calories. So clearly, something's wrong with this equation. It isn't a one size fits all, that everybody's the same, and why should you only have 2,000 calories? How's that worked out? We've all got different exercise levels, but it all comes there's a big industry around calories, diet foods, short-term goals. People love a single number. humans are suckers for the quick solution and, I
Yeah.
just need this. This is a fantastic low calorie thing. I can take it. It's like the magic pill. But it doesn't work like that. It's all about the hunger levels. And that's why, Zoe, we're trying to, we say, we don't mention the C word, right? It's like, it's really important. You've got to stop thinking about it and add more to your plate, which means more, in bringing enjoyment back into food, but going back to those whole foods that have lots of fiber in it, lots of diversity, lots of plants, but still having your meat if you like it. It nothing's off the table, even the occasional donut. It doesn't matter as long as you've got a long-term goal that 80% of the time you're doing the right thing. And that's really our idea, is to really make people think about food in a different way, because it's not about a few weeks and I can lose a few pounds. It's, how do I shift everything about my body and my gut microbes in that right direction that's going to last me for decades and help my immune system and everything else. And once you start to feel better, then it becomes obvious. And our studies have also shown that if you do this and you disregard calories, you will lose weight and you actually get less hunger. So all of the trials we do, whether it's with our prebiotic, our fermented food, or following the app, hunger signals go down. And this is because when you're eating things like plants and improving your gut microbes, it's sending different signals to your brain than if you're just having low-calorie junk food. And I think that's really important, that, we've got to get back to quality of food and not about calories and quantity.
Speaking of quality of food, you talk about something called the food matrix. Can you help us understand what the food matrix is? When I heard of it, I thought of the food pyramid, but I'm not sure that's the way that I should be thinking about it.
No, the food matrix is really another way of talking about food structure. So, and it's another example of how, calorie counting is way off, because it will treat a bag of whole almonds the same as a bag of almond flour. And yet we know from careful experiments that if you give people almond flour, they'll be getting 20% more calories from that than the raw almonds, and at the energy. Because if you break it down as the industrial food places do into its tiniest components, you're breaking apart the cells of the plant. And when you do that, you're releasing sugars or fats that are stored inside there. Whereas if you have the whole nuts, for example, a lot of those fats and sugars in those are not going to be absorbed until really low down, or they might actually pass out in the toilet. So that's what we're talking about when we're structure. And there's lots of examples, whether it's nuts or chickpeas is another one. If you have whole chickpeas rather than you mush it up as hummus, there's a slight difference in that, in how you absorb it and its effect on the body. So all comes back to the quality, and the more whole foods you're eating, the better it is for your body and your metabolism. It sort of makes sense from an evolutionary point of view, because it also takes more time to eat, gives your body time to react normally in the way we were evolved to do, and also fills you up as it's supposed to do. Whereas everything about the industrial process is to speed it up. And if it can get you that food down, say, you finished your meal in 15 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever, then your hunger centers won't have kicked in your brain as well. So it's all part of the same idea. So structure is very important. Again, it goes with texture and softness and all these things.
I want to spend a moment on your story. So I found out that your father actually passed away quite young, around 50 years old, of a heart condition. And it was kind of unexpected. And it was a turning point for you, maybe not immediately, but at some point when you had your own health scare. Talk to us about the things that have happened in your life that made you realize that things really need to be different, and that even though you thought you were operating in a healthy way, you needed to change your own health.
Yeah, well, there's nothing quite like, personal experience or tragedy to wake you up. And, for much of my 30s and 40s, I was an arrogant, cocky MD, who are particularly arrogant, confident, because that's what we're trained to do, thinking that I had the answers and that, we didn't learn much about food or nutrition at medical school, but no one did. But I still had the answers because, the pills were the answer and everything else. And you think you're fairly invincible, and you don't worry about long-term health. When I was 54, I had this mini stroke as I was on a top of a mountain in Italy, and had some high blood pressure. I got better in 3 months, but it was a bit of a shock to the system because I suddenly realized I was so close to when my father had died, and it sort of got rid of that complacency in me. So I suddenly had a bit of a reality check and said, gosh, this 20 pounds I put on in the last 20 years, maybe it's not all muscle. A lot of men just say, hey, I'm bulking up. This is great, 'Cause I didn't look fat, but it was certainly been slowly accumulating. And I suddenly realized my diet was pretty terrible. Once I started researching this, and I was writing a book on the microbiome at the time called The Diet Myth, and I really started breaking it all apart. And suddenly realizing that, my breakfast was wrong, my lunch in the hospital of a sandwich and orange juice and a bag of chips was wrong. Me just having lots of low-fat foods and lots of pasta and bread really wasn't very good for me. And so, I suddenly realized that I had to change if I was going to avoid the fate of my father. And, it really drove me not only to look after myself, but also, to sort of rewrite a lot of these nutritional guides, because a lot of the nutritional guidelines haven't caught up with the latest science, and they're, always lagging at least 10 years behind. So that was really important to me. But it was a bit of a journey.
Yeah. And you actually basically pivoted your career at that point, and you started putting yourself in conversations. And was it hard to gain that credibility initially with other thought leaders? Because they're like, who's this guy? He came out of nowhere.
It was. And you get treated like shit. Who is this guy? He hasn't done 10, 20 years in the field like we have. But I was sort of used to it because I've changed careers a few times. I started as a rheumatologist. I was, like a board certified rheumatologist. And then I got into epidemiology. So I went back to school, did my thesis on that. And then I had to teach myself genetics. So I got a few, cold shoulders doing that as well, as you can imagine. So by this time, I'd got over that initial thing. And it's probably the reason most doctors don't change specialty, is doctors don't like change. And they feel, well, if I've spent the hard yards doing all this, all my certificates on the wall, why am I going to listen to this new guy? But I think it's been great, really, because it gives you a much broader view of everything. And medicine really needs a holistic view nowadays, rather than these minute, these people who have these tiny specialties that miss the point. And I think this is what I'm realizing more and more.
Totally. And I'm sure your work with genetics really helped you understand nutrition even more and in a different way than everybody else did.
Yeah, I think that's right. And we realized we only cracked genetics when we got really big numbers. So for 10 years, I was writing lots of papers. I've written nearly 1,000 papers. It's crazy, but a lot of them were rubbish. They were just, in the early days, you thought this gene was associated with this, and we found the obesity gene, we found the, depression gene. It was all nonsense until we got really big numbers. We're talking, 10, 100,000 people. Then we started to see some real answers. And the same has been true in nutrition, and that's driven me both, nutrition and gut health. That's why we're doing studies now with 300,000 people, which, through all these members of Zoe now, that we can really separate the wood from the trees in ways that we couldn't do before. And that's been a huge lesson for me, which, the nutrition field was quite happy to look at 20 people at a time, generally, US students, usually male, usually, under 25. So not very generalizable. So I think it is, experience in other fields really important. And I think more people should definitely do it and take the plunge. Although, the first time you do it, it's not easy.
And I think more people should get involved in this food revolution that's going on because it is so needed. Like, it's absolutely mind-blowing to me when I have these conversations with scientists and doctors like you, when we just realize that so much of what we're eating is basically food that is not really food, but just edible and kind of mimics what food should be, and that these scientists that work at these food companies are modifying food in a way that makes us eat more, that makes us like hungry all the time, that's not actually giving us nutrition, that's ruining our microbiome. Like, it just seems so immoral.
Well, it is when you put it that way. But it's like we haven't been educated. We don't get taught in school about nutrition. We've had very little way of fighting back. And, as I said, we're susceptible to the easy solution, aren't we? We're proposed something, oh, this is the cure. You just have to take these pills. You can take the crappy diet, but as long as you got these supplements, which make huge amounts of money for those companies, you'll be fine. And then you get these influencers who are paid by the supplement companies to tell you exactly that. And again, people want a simple black and white solution. And of course, it's very complex. Nutrition is moved from being the most boring science subject to probably the most complex and interesting, in my view. So, no doctors went into nutrition because it was too dull. That's the honest. That's why there are no real MD nutrition experts, or very few of them. It was incredibly dull because after the Second World War, it was all about vitamin deficiency, not about dealing with modern food and the food industry. So it's sort of understandable why we're in this. But I think, given that we have incredible power over what food choices we make, at least most of us do, not everybody, but those with any sort of income, we're making hundreds of food choices a week. And it's not like exercise where you have to give up, several hours of every day. Mm-hmm. It's just a simple choice. You can say, I can put this in my mouth, or I can pick something else. And that's what we're not realizing, that we've got this incredible power to change ourselves and to change our destinies and live another 10 years of healthy life just by making better food choices, not by spending lots more time in the gym.
Well, this is such a great segue because, like you just said, we have agency, but we need to understand how to kind of understand the marketing that's getting pushed at us and what is real versus what is BS. So I thought we could play a little bit of a game where we talk about the grocery store label lies. So what do these labels actually mean? And what do we need to look out for? Okay. So the first one is when we're in the grocery store and we see something that says low calorie. A lot of people will pick that up, think that's healthy for us. Why is low calorie not necessarily healthy?
Well, I'd stick that in the trash because it means that they've reduced the sugar in some way. Generally, it's the sugar they go for, and they've replaced it with something else. And that could be low-quality fats like palm oil, or they've added artificial sweeteners and a mix of those. So, or they've just given you a very small portion size. That's the other way around it. So, baby portions. But generally, for me, it's a red flag that I would never buy anything that says low calorie on it, because unless maybe, you wanted to switch from regular Coke to Diet Coke, which is probably slightly better for you. If you've got diabetes or something, yes, in those instances, might be worth it. But generally, it's a red flag.
To me, soda in general, don't put it in your grocery cart, right? Just avoid at all costs.
Yes, the whole area is a massive red flag. And if you're not having lots of sugar, you're having lots of chemical sweeteners, and we still don't know the long-term effects of those.
Okay, if something is labeled organic, is that something that we should take seriously, or does organic not really matter? Is that just hype?
Well, it sort of depends on what product you're looking at. In general, the certification of organic in the US is pretty poor. So there's lots of misclassification and mis-selling. And you might end up paying twice as much for something that says organic. If it's a product, for example, that has high pesticide or herbicide use, buying an organic one is likely to give you less of that chemical. So a good example might be if you have oats for breakfast every day, then you'll be getting only 20% of the sprayed chemical on it, the glyphosate or on your oats, if you chose the organic one and it was true. But for many products, it's probably not worth it, and I'd rather people spend their money buying better quality fruit and veg than only getting organic. I mean, in general, though, we should support farmers that try and do things organic because it means they are taking more care over those products, and so there are lots of exceptions. But some things it's not worth. If you're worried about the spraying of chemicals and you're buying an orange, well, you just peel the orange. It's got a thick skin, so you're not going to get it anyway. Things you're having a lot of, then you might want to reduce those particular risks, like berries and strawberries get sprayed a lot. So again, if you're having those regularly, might be worth it. But as a general rule, I think it's slightly overhyped. There's no big evidence of people shifting makes a massive difference. If you got the money, go for it. If you haven't, don't worry about it.
Now, this is a really popular one. Now, everything says the amount of protein on the front, high protein, high protein. Is that becoming like the new low calorie, low fat?
Yeah, for a year or two now, there's been protein mania, and food companies love it because there's lots of cheap protein out there they can add in powders to anything. I've seen surveys in the US showing that 70 to 80% of people believe that if they see high protein in a product, it's healthy, and they don't look beyond the protein. So it's definitely going to replace the low calorie. And you see this turning up in all kinds of terrible snack bars that are incredibly unhealthy, and they've just added a bit of soy protein or milk protein on the top, and it's
like protein bars that we all get. Yeah,
they're generally absolutely terrible. So yeah, I think that's a real red flag. If you want protein, get the high quality stuff. If you want, dairy and red, lean meat and things like this, and legumes. Don't buy it in a chemical form, because the average American is already getting more than enough protein. There are, a few people who are protein deficient, but the vast majority of people, unless they're sick, elderly, or bodybuilding, are not really going to be needing any extra. There's getting plenty.
Yeah, you say there's a fiber crisis, not a protein crisis. Like, we've got it backwards.
Yeah, that's right. Only 10% of people need more protein, whereas 95% of people need more fiber. We're really deficient in the Western world on fiber, and the USA is probably leading the world on that.
Yeah, it's something we don't want to be number one for sure. What about the word natural?
Pretty meaningless. Opium's natural, isn't it? And it's sort of necessarily good for you. So yeah, lots of natural things. Yeah, it's a meaningless term. It doesn't have a clear definition. It's used on marketing. Again, it doesn't mean it's necessarily bad, but it's just a sign that someone's got to. They're trying a bit hard to market this at you by using a meaningless term, full of natural goodness. And of course, natural. There's this sort of definition between natural and synthetic. So people are using flavorings and colorings, which we might say are natural in those products. Really, whereas in the past they didn't worry about that. So they realize the consumer doesn't want artificial dyes, but they would happy if there's something called a natural dye made from carrots or beetroot. They feel a bit happier with that. But in general, yeah, it's a pretty meaningless term.
When something says made with real fruit, what do you think they're typically hiding?
Either there's virtually none in it, or they're using some pulp of the fruit and they're mixing it with other things. So a lot of yogurts and breakfast cereals have, say, made with real fruit. They don't have to say what percentage is actually real fruit. And generally, you shouldn't have to tell a consumer it's got real fruit. You should be able to see it, right? And generally you can't. And certainly things like children's yogurts and breakfast cereals have these reconstituted, flavored, berry-flavored bits of starch and crumbs that they pass off as fruit. And they might have added some fruit puree at some point so they can claim it somewhere in that product is some real fruit. But generally, yeah, that's another red flag.
Is there anything we didn't talk about that we should be aware of when we're grocery shopping?
There are some really difficult items when you're shopping. I find bread really tough. Getting a good bread because they all claim to be the same. And it's often the ratio of how much sugar there is in that bread compared to the amount of fibers in that bread. And that's quite a hard calculation to do in your head. So again, look really carefully, because people have a lot of bread, they have it regularly. So so the items that you buy all the time are really important to scrutinize and trying to get the best ones. So you should be looking at the highest fiber content and the relatively lower sugar amount. And you don't want a big list of chemicals as well. So that's one I find difficult.
Yogurt could be like really good or really bad too, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's really hard in some parts of the US, I found, to get a yogurt that has nothing in it at all apart from the milk and the microbes. That vanilla's added as standard. You get sweeteners in there. You get bits of fruit and whatever. So you just got to try and get the least amount of ingredients, the simplest it is, that it's going to be good. And particularly children's yogurt is even worse. If you've got kids, then really important that you don't get them those brightly colored ones, which probably have got no live microbes in them at all. And they'll neutralize any of the goodness in that yogurt as well. So I think, so the two aisles where I think, things like the children's aisle, the yogurt aisle, the bread aisle, that's really where you should become an expert. But some of these ones, it may be obvious. You can work it out if they're so full of cartoons and messages that it's obvious. Other ones, you may have to, barcode scan it, with an app like Zoe's. It can be really tough. But I think work out what you're having regularly and then always get the better version of it, I think is what we should be aiming at.
I learned that you had a high microplastic count in your blood at some point. How do you feel about food packaging? Like, are you concerned with that? I know you were talking about canned foods being okay, but I think there's aluminum in canned foods, and that could be really bad for us as well.
So I looked into this, and I'm fairly relaxed about canned foods. They've done lots of studies that have been around for, hundreds of years. But I'm more concerned now about having too much plastic, and obviously clear dangers of buying, say, bottled water in plastic. You leave them in your car, it gets a bit hot. All those chemicals leak out into the water, and then if that's part of your regular drink, that's not good. So I'm trying to cut down on my plastic containers as much as I can, and making sure that also when you might microwave or heat something up, you take it out of the original plastic container and put it in some glass or ceramic. I think we've got a bit complacent around plastic. It's very cheap. It's a byproduct of the petrol industry. It's virtually forced on us. It's very hard to avoid it, and yeah, nobody wants to think their brains are slowly filling up with microplastics. Even if we don't know exactly what they do. Again, if there's a simple choice, going back to my idea of, we're constantly making these little food choices, am I going to bother putting it into another bowl? Yes. Do I want my water bottle to be plastic, or do I want it to be metal or made of something else? These are very easy choices for us to make without ruining your life and getting super stressed about it, because you can't avoid plastic. And I think we don't want to be so plastic phobic that we go the other way, which would probably have negative effects on your mental health.
Yeah, I feel like for me, one of the biggest health changes I could make is to start to just avoid plastic more often and avoid plastic water bottles. Like, how do you drink your water? Like, what do you use for your water at home?
After my scare, I went and got water filters installed, and so my water tastes better, and you get any of those microplastics filtered out. So I'm quite happy to have my filtered water, or if I do buy specialty waters, I like a nice Italian or Spanish mineral water. I'll buy in a glass bottle, so that works for me. And I carry a metal water bottle with me. So yeah, I could do more, but I reckon that there's a sort of very easy way of doing this, and no one really knows. I had above average microplastic levels, but nobody knows what's critical. Hopefully I'll die before I have any problems due to them. But it's very early science. I think there's probably many other things in our food that are worse for us than those, although they sound scary. But we're surrounded by a lot of these. Just starving our microbes, I think, is a worse crime than having a little bit of plastic every time we have a drink.
So I want to close out today's interviews talking about fermented foods. You just mentioned starving our microbes, and I know fermented foods is something our microbes really like. You actually changed your mind on this. You thought fermented foods was for like hippies, and then you changed your mind. So what made you change your mind about fermented foods, and what should we know about them?
So what really changed my mind was understanding a mechanism of how they might work. Because the field, as I said, of nutrition is not well funded. The studies are small. Some of them are funded by dairy companies and et cetera, which, can be biased. So I thought, well, they might have some advantages, but the evidence isn't very strong. And there's no evidence that these microbes, when you drink them, say in a yogurt or a milk kefir, they stay in your gut and they take over, So that was always a bit odd. So how do they work if they don't hang around very long? You've got to keep drinking them and they have this effect. And how are they working? Because they'd be really outnumbered in your gut, because there are billions of them when you drink them, but there's trillions, hundreds of trillions of the other guys, right? So it's a bit like you going into a football stadium and waving your hands around, hoping everyone's going to notice. It's like that scale. So it was a study about 3 or 4 years ago by a colleague of mine, Christopher Gardner, and Justin Sonnenberg in Stanford, where they gave 28 volunteers really large amounts of fermented food, 5 portions a day. They took blood every day on these guys, and they noticed that after 2 weeks, they'd reduced the inflammation levels in their blood by about 25%. And that was the first time anyone had really shown in a proper, really high-level experiment that microbes have this effect. And they have an effect that we didn't expect, I didn't anyway, that it would be directly on the immune system, not by just inhabiting our gut microbes. So they're tickling something in our gut that is sending signals to the rest of the body to say, calm down, relax. It's like having low dose of steroids, really. And to me, that was a game changer. I said, wow, suddenly we've got a mechanism here. We know how it works. And then I went and did because it was only 28 people, usually, young males, as always in these studies. So we did a real life study with Zoe. We got, we asked 9,000 Zoe members to do a citizen science study, and take fermented foods. They weren't fermented food people, and we asked them to take 3 portions a day for 2 weeks. And 6,500 of them did it. 1,000 more dropped out. They didn't like it. But those that did go to the end and take it, over 50% of them felt better in terms of mood, energy, and hunger. And they can all be related to inflammation and brain effects. And to me, those 2 studies, plus all this old literature that have been out there, convinced me that these have a really important effect on our immune system via our gut microbes, and we should be having much more of it in our diets. And they're not. And until recently, they haven't been recommended. Although the latest US guidelines, they've now put them back in really as and the gut microbiome is, for the first time this year, has suddenly got a place.
What are some examples? So there's like kombucha, yogurt, kefir, any other big ones that you think we should be aware of?
I remember it by the 4 Ks. So I get kombucha, kefir or kefir, which is fermented milk. You've got kimchi, which the national dish of Korea, which is one of the best ones because it's got so many microbes in it. And then you've got krauts. So that's things like sauerkraut, but also could be beetroot kraut or any vegetable you can make into a kraut. Then you've got all the Japanese dishes, so anything based on fermented soybeans. So that includes miso, miso soup, miso paste, which I now use instead of a stock cube. Make my own miso, and suddenly it's in everything, and it tastes amazing. And then you've got other things called, there's something called tibikos or water kefir, which I think is going to get more attention. Again, it's a bit like kombucha, but you add fruits to it, and it's really exciting. And every country has got its own fermented food. Apart from the English-speaking countries, which seem to have got rid of them pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. If you travel around, you'll go to Africa, you get various porridges and other ferments. You go to India, they've got lots of ferments there and lassis and things like this that are made with ferments. So there are hundreds, if not thousands, of different ferments around the world. And you can either buy them in a store, make them yourself. That's why I wrote my book, Ferment, which is really to understand the science of this and try to get more people having ferments. Because I think the goal should be to get trying at 3 ferments a day. And if you also think that some of the things you don't think of as fermented, you've got cheese, of course, and just got to make sure it's real cheese. It doesn't come in a plastic wrapper and I've had a cheese on my shelf that from that famous brand Kraft that's lasted 5 years. It's still nice and orange and shiny. There's not many microbes there. But interestingly, I did do an experiment on Philadelphia cream cheese, one of America's favorite. That's got some live microbes in it. So that probably means it's also good for you. So there's lots of stuff out there. You just got to, again, think about food in a different way. What can I add? And you can add these things to your meals. You can, start using yogurt or kefir instead of cream. You can put all these mixes. You can add your krauts to soups or curries. Lots of things you can do to get ferments in your diet, and start slowly. You don't have to go hardcore. That's the other thing.
Now, for the listener who's an entrepreneur and they're obsessed with hustling, working hard, productivity, performance, thinking clearly, and maybe their motivation for eating right isn't necessarily like longevity, but it's more about how do I decrease my brain fog, have a better mood, and be more productive. What do you want to say to them?
All the experiments we've done at Zoe have shown that the first effects of improving your diet from a gut point of view are in the brain. And if you value your brain and you want to improve your mood and your energy, your tiredness, then a gut-friendly diet is the way to go. And it doesn't matter whether you're just shifting yourself a little bit towards more fiber and more diversity, giving yourself fermented foods, or you're actually taking, our prebiotic supplement on top of your food, they all work. And, my mood has really improved since I started doing this. And it's something people don't associate with food. I think that's the other important thing, that we're never told, what you had for breakfast can influence how you feel 3 hours later, but it does. And you only notice it when you start to record it. And that's what we're trying to do, is to get people to make this link between the food they choose or what they ate last night, how much gap they left overnight. But, by me, if I went back to my old way of having breakfast, which was, a granola, an orange juice, a bit of low-fat milk and tea, or maybe a bagel or a croissant, compared to what I have now, which is, a yogurt, a kefir, nuts, seeds, my daily 30 and some berries, it's night and day 3 hours later. I don't need, a double coffee and a chocolate biscuit or a snack at 11 o'clock in the morning. I just, I'm full and I'm mentally focused. So I'd say to anyone listening, give it a go, and you'll notice the difference in 2 weeks. If you think about, if you're recording what your energy and mood levels are before and after, and you're focused on it. And hopefully in the app, we haven't got it there yet, but we're going to start having a way of people can track their mood and energy, which I think will be a real step forward in this, because doctors never ask it. It's just not something that we don't talk about, really. We always assume it's other factors. It's the fact that I've got a busy life, I didn't sleep well. We don't actually make that link with food, but it is, I've learned it's really crucial.
So to recap, 30 different plants a week, 3 different fermented foods a day. Any other big ones that you want to call out?
Yeah, lots of bright color on your plate. So you're eating the rainbow. You've got leave a gap, so no late night snacking. So you're getting at least 12 hours overnight. Switch, protein source, get lots of legumes in there, beans, lentils, chickpeas, all those things are really good for you. Cut out your UPFs as much as you can. Maybe, use our app if that's helpful for you. And forget about calories. And I think do all those things and you'll be a new person.
Amazing. Well, Tim, thank you so much for joining us on Young and Profiting Podcast. Where can everybody learn about what you do, and where can they find you?
You can follow me on Instagram, and all the things I've been talking about, the research studies at Zoe, at zoe.com. Our website there has got all our research papers. We've got over 70 research papers from the team there, as well as the products that are available. And and we also have a podcast. So the Zoe Nutrition and Science podcast is also another free to listen to for anyone who's out that wants to dive deeper into this area.
The Zoe podcast and YouTube channel is actually huge. So we'll stick all those links in the show notes. I found it really entertaining and educational. So Dr. Tim, thank you so much for joining us on Young and Profiting Podcast.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, fam, this conversation with Tim challenged one of the biggest assumptions we've been taught about nutrition, that if we eat healthy foods, we all get the same healthy results. Tim's research showed that even identical twins with identical genetics can have dramatically different gut microbiomes. That helps explain why some meals can leave one person energized while the other person feels depleted and hungry. It's a great lesson to stop chasing generic advice from social media and start paying attention to your own body's signals. When it comes to nutrition, personalized data will always beat trendy one-size-fits-all solutions, and that's really the future of healthcare and nutrition. Tim also encouraged us to stop obsessing over calorie counting and start focusing on food quality. As he said, think of foods in terms of quality, not calories. Calories don't tell you how a food impacts your microbiome, your hunger, your immune system, or what long-term health benefits they have. Instead, focus on feeding the trillions of microbes that help power your body. Aim for roughly 30 different plant foods each week. This can seem overwhelming, but it also includes herbs, spices, nuts, and seeds. Add fermented foods like kefir, kimchi, sauerkraut, or yogurt into your routine. And rather than avoiding all processed foods, which some processed foods like frozen foods and canned beans are actually good for you, learn to recognize and limit ultra-processed foods that are engineered to keep you eating more and hungry. For entrepreneurs, this isn't just a health conversation, it's a performance conversation. Your focus, energy, resilience, and decision-making all depend on the fuel that you give yourself. As Tim told us, we make hundreds of food choices every week. Those choices add up, so the next time you're standing in the grocery store, don't just ask, how many calories are in this? Ask yourself, what is this doing for the person I'm trying to become? And is this healthy for my microbiome? Thank you for joining me on this episode of Young and Profiting. Every week, you're investing in your growth, your future, and the impact you want to make in the world. So if this episode changed the way that you think about what's on your plate, share it with a friend, family member, or anyone who needs a more freeing way to think about food. And wait, there's more. YouTube is excellent at knowing what conversation you're going to enjoy the most. And here's what they recommended. Go check it out, and I'll catch you next time.